Hello and welcome to episode 207 of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and today we officially begin a 31-episode journey through the book of Numbers. Now, let's be honest right out of the gate. Numbers is not the book most people sprint toward in their Bible reading plan. Nobody wakes up thinking, you know what I'm craving today? A good census list. And yet, right here, at the very beginning of Numbers, we're confronted with a question critics love to raise. How could Moses possibly have written this book? Because, according to modern critical scholarship, Numbers, and really the entire Pentateuch, was not written by Moses at all. Instead, we're told it was pieced together centuries later, maybe even during or after the Babylonian exile. The claim is that what we're reading isn't an eyewitness account from Israel's wilderness wanderings, but a carefully edited collection of older traditions, compiled, revised, and stitched together long after Moses was gone. And if that's true, this isn't just an academic curiosity. It raises a much larger question. Does that undermine the reliability of Scripture? Or is the criticism missing something important? That's the head-scratcher we're tackling today. And fair warning, this one gets a little technical. But stay with me because it matters far more than it sounds at first. Let's start with a verse that sets the stage. Numbers 1:1 in the New Living Translation reads, "A year after Israel's departure from Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the tabernacle in the wilderness of Sinai." The ESV puts it this way: "The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt." Either way, the claim is unmistakable. Numbers presents itself as a direct revelation from God to Moses, spoken in real time in a specific place at a specific moment in Israel's history. Not a reflection centuries later, not a theological reconstruction, but a contemporary revelation. And that's exactly where critics push back. Before responding, I want to be fair. I want to present the opposing view the way its supporters would recognize it, not a caricature, not a straw man. The primary challenge comes from what's known as the documentary hypothesis, often abbreviated as JEDP. If you want a clear academic summary of this view, the University of Maryland has a widely cited overview simply titled The Documentary Hypothesis. It lays out the standard framework used in most critical discussions today. I have it linked in the show notes. The theory was popularized in the 19th century, especially through Julius Wellhausen, and it argues that the Pentateuch is a composite of four major sources. J, the Yahwist source, using the name Yahweh, dated around 850 BC. E, the Elohist source, preferring Elohim, from northern Israel around 750 BC. D, the Deuteronomist, tied to centralized worship reforms around 620 BC. And P, the priestly source, emphasizing ritual, genealogy, and law, often dated to the post-exilic period around 500 BC. If you're thinking, Lance, this sounds less like biblical scholarship and more like alphabet soup, you're not wrong. Welcome to source criticism. According to this view, a final redactor, often identified with Ezra, combined these sources into the Pentateuch we have today. More recent versions of this theory shift the emphasis. Scholar Joel S. Baden, in his article, The Reemergence of Source Criticism, the Neo-Documentary Hypothesis, argues that narrative contradictions, not just vocabulary or style, prove multiple independent sources behind books like Numbers. Critics point to repeated stories, shifting divine names, chronological tensions, and alleged anachronisms. They argue that priestly material in Numbers reflects post-exilic concerns rather than a wilderness setting. And to be clear, most critics don't say the Bible is worthless. They simply argue it's a human document shaped over time. That's the critical case presented fairly. Now, let's look at the other side of the ledger, because when you examine the evidence, biblical, historical, and archaeological, the case for Mosaic authorship is far stronger than critics often admit. First, the Bible itself consistently attributes the Torah to Moses. Numbers 33:2 says this: "At the Lord's direction, Moses kept a written record of their progress. These are the stages of their march, identified by the different places where they stopped along the way." Now, that reads like a travel log, not a later reconstruction. Exodus 24:4 tells us Moses wrote down all the Lord's instructions. Deuteronomy 31:24 says Moses finished writing this entire body of instruction in a book. A helpful overview of these internal claims is found in the Answers in Genesis article, Evidence for the Mosaic Authorship of the Torah, which walks through these passages and explains why they read like eyewitness testimony. And that attribution doesn't stop in the Old Testament. Jesus himself attributes the law to Moses. In John 5:46, Jesus says, "If you really believed Moses, you would have believed me, because he wrote about me." Jesus refers directly to Numbers 21 in John 3:14, the bronze serpent in the wilderness, and treats it as Mosaic. Apologetics Press addresses this head-on in their article Mosaic Authorship of the Pentateuch, Tried and True, arguing that once Jesus and the apostles are taken seriously, Mosaic authorship is no longer optional, it's foundational. Acts, Hebrews, and 1 Corinthians all follow the same assumption. That's a theological weight critics have to carry. Now, let's talk archaeology. The Ketef Hinnom scrolls, dating to the 7th century BC, contain the Aaronic blessing from Numbers 6:24-26, placing the text well before the exile. Egyptian parallels line up cleanly with a second millennium setting: portable sanctuary designs, silver trumpets, legal forms, and social customs that match Moses' world, not a post-exilic one. Dave Armstrong, in his article Moses Wrote the Torah, 50 External Evidences, catalogs these details and show how consistently they point to Mosaic times. Even long-standing objections, like camels in the patriarchal period, have collapsed under archaeological evidence. What about style and literary variation? Critics often argue that different tones prove different authors. But Jeannie DuBay, in her article Sacred Scripture and Mosaic Authorship, Fact or Fiction, points out that Genesis and the Torah match Second Millennium Near Eastern literature remarkably well. Ancient authors regularly used multiple names for the same deity, shifted styles between genres, and repeated material for emphasis. Using different names for God no more proves multiple authors than calling me Lance, Dad, or Hey You proves that I'm three different people. Ancient writing didn't work like modern academic prose. Let me put this another way. Imagine a family recipe passed down orally for years. Eventually, Grandma writes it down. Later, critics say, this couldn't have come from one person. The flavors change. But variation doesn't prove confusion, it proves intention. Moses wasn't writing a novel. He was recording law, history, narrative, and poetry, sometimes all in the same chapter. John Youssef, in The Case for Mosaic Authorship, emphasizes that passages like Numbers 33 read less like theology written in hindsight and more like a personal itinerary recorded by someone who was actually there. And yes, minor post-Mosaic updates like the account of Moses' death don't undo Mosaic authorship any more than an editor's footnote undoes a textbook. So where does this leave us? Friends, the evidence stacks up. The Bible's on testimony, archaeology, ancient literary practice, and the witness of Jesus himself. Moses could have written numbers, and all signs point to the fact that he did. The documentary hypothesis is clever, but it rests on hypothetical documents no one has ever seen, subjective divisions scholars can't agree on, and a built-in rejection of divine revelation. This isn't just academic. If Moses didn't write numbers, the chain from promise to fulfillment weakens. But if he did, then Numbers stands as a first-hand account of God's faithfulness in the wilderness. And that matters, because many of us are walking through our own wilderness right now. Moses didn't write Numbers from a distance. He wrote it from the dust. And the same God who spoke then still speaks now. If these episodes are helpful, your support is always appreciated but never expected. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Lance Smith. You can find more episodes at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com or email me anytime at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, for sharing, and being a part of this community, including our Facebook page. This is Lance Smith, wishing you good health, good study, and God's blessing. So long, everybody.